if there was one really defining moment of my life, it was when I had the realization during that process, you can train your mind to be happier and stronger and more resilient, and that it's actually a skill, like happiness is a skill. And I think when I actually got that, then the realization hit me then, like, if it's a skill and someone teaches me the right skills, it would be similar to learning to ride a bike or drive a car. Someone teaches you skills, you practice them, and you get it.
What if the hardest moments in your life weren't just obstacles, but opportunities? Opportunities to unlock a deeper strength inside of you, to rise from fear, stress, and uncertainty, and to step into your most empowered, resilient self emotionally and physically. Let's be real, life isn't easy, especially right now with all that's going on in the world. Each one of us goes through heartbreak, loss, setbacks, and moments of deep self doubt. And sometimes, despite all the work we've done, whether it's been therapy, mindfulness, personal growth, we still find ourselves stuck in old patterns, feeling overwhelmed, like maybe we should be handling things better. Does that sound familiar? My guest today is Melli O'Brien, a world renowned mindfulness teacher, speaker, and author of the new book, Deep Resilience. Melli has not only studied emotional resilience, she's lived it. At 17, she faced a personal crisis that nearly broke her. You'll hear more about that in a couple of minutes. Later in life, despite years of teaching mindfulness and emotional well being, she was hit with a cascade of devastating losses, losing loved ones, a chronic illness, and deep personal challenges. And even with all the tools she had, she found herself on the brink of burnout and breakdown. But instead of giving up, she developed a system, a framework that allowed her to move through life's hardest moments with more strength, clarity, and purpose. She calls it the RISE method, a 4-step approach to deep resilience, and today she's going to share it with us. In this episode, you'll learn why resilience isn't just about bouncing back, it's about rising forward. I love that word, rising. The science-backed way to regulate your emotions in high-stress moments. She'll talk about how self-compassion done right isn't just a nice idea, it's a game changer. The power of aligning with your values, even when fear is screaming at you to stay small, and the exact steps you can take today to feel stronger, steadier, and more in control of your life. The conversation is powerful, practical, and we also get deeply personal with each other in there. So whether you're struggling with self-doubt, stress, or just want to feel more grounded in the chaos of today, you're going to walk away with real tools you can use immediately. Okay, let's get into it. Welcome, Melli, to the Emotional Longevity Podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's so nice to be here. And I've been loving the podcast, by the way. I've been listening, really enjoying the content that you're putting out. It's really, really good stuff.
Thank you. I've also been really enjoying being with everyone, and I'm looking forward to our interview today. And because what one of the things that I resonate with, that I'm looking forward to talking about today with you, is we're all like, suffering is a part of life, and people who are listening to this podcast right now certainly have had experiences of their life of suffering, or they currently could be suffering in the moment. And the theme of this podcast is emotional longevity, which is the idea of having emotional health over time. Like, how do we support emotional health over time, and how does it support our longevity, our health span, and our life? I wanted to go back a little bit and talk about the crisis point you had at 17, just to set the stage for everyone here, when you were feeling isolated and stuck. And just take a moment, if you can, and paint a picture for us. Bring us into this. What was going on in your head and heart back then?
Gosh, I notice like even now there's such a tenderness whenever I talk about this. But yeah, so when I was around about the age of 16, 17, at that point, I had been struggling for a long time. There was some trauma in my childhood that I think really just got me stuck in some negative thought loops and emotional patterns and behavioral patterns that just got me more and more. I was kind of like sliding backwards down into this kind of darker and darker way of being. I developed an eating disorder and depression, and I hit a crisis point this kind of dark night of the soul where I kind of hit it. This is rock bottom. I was thinking to myself, I'm only 17. I cannot live with this much pain. It's just not an option. So there's two paths in front of me. I'm either going to take my own life, and I was starting to consider that quite seriously, um, or I have to actually try very hard now. I'm going to have to do something really different to shake things up, to find a different way of being. So I kind of made a deal with myself at that time. You've always got option A. You can take your own life whenever you want. That's there. But you might as well try one more time to see. I'd tried therapy at that point, and I'd tried some other healing modalities, and nothing was really, I think it helped a little bit. Maybe it's like if you're a drowning person, I kind of grab the life raft and I can catch my breath, but
Gave you
um,
just enough. Yeah.
just enough. Yeah, but I needed to do something else. So I didn't know any way to start, but I decided I'm going to try one more time. I had no idea what to do. So I just went to my school library, actually, and I went and got all the books off the shelf that had anything to do with mental health that I could find. And that wasn't very prominent back then. So I got books down about comparative religion. I got some psychology books down and just kind of read them all, and tried to find the common threads between them. And I would say it's hard to say there's one defining moment of your life, but if there was one really defining moment of my life, it was when I had the realization during that process that the books, especially on like Buddhism and yoga and things like that, they were saying you can train your mind to be happier and stronger and more resilient, and that it's actually a skill, like happiness is a skill. And I think when I actually got that, when that actually really landed in my being, like then the realization hit me then, like if it's a skill and someone teaches me the right skills, it would be similar to learning to ride a bike or drive a car. Someone teaches you skills, you practice them, and you get it. So that was a really empowering moment for me. It was the first moment where I was like, oh, maybe this is like inevitable. If I can just learn the right skills, I'll be able to actually find my way through this.
It's almost like
So that
that gave
was the
you like
turning
a win.
point.
That was like a window of hope. Like it opened up
Absolutely.
hope for
Yeah,
you, and hope kind of gave you energy for the next. Okay. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. That was my moment where I think I made an internal decision at that moment that I need to find those skills then. I have to find those skills. So luckily for me, I was living in a small country town, but I did find a lady who was at that time teaching mindfulness in my town. And that was where my journey began, of having a really good guide teach me some of the right skills and starting to then get positive change. And I was like, okay, this is true. That is a true hypothesis. I think that it seems to be that if I practice these skills, I feel better, I get stronger, I'm breaking old patterns. And yeah, that was the beginning of a big turnaround.
That it makes so much sense when you think about it just logically. Like when you practice and repeat something with intention, it starts to become more automatic. And in the field of psychology, we call that procedural memory. The brain is memorizing procedures. In
Yeah.
the field of neuroscience, they started calling it positive neuroplasticity, and getting activity to happen in certain parts of the brain, and then it starts to rewire. And then in other areas, we call it habits of mind. So many different words
Yeah.
for these things that you're talking about. You in your history, and you talk about this in your book, Deep Resilience. Um, you mentioned that there was because this is just the beginning of your story. That you mentioned there's things like heartbreak, there's major illness, there's entrepreneurial setbacks. Like when you and I met, just for everyone's background a little bit, like Melli put on this incredible summit, if you aren't aware of it, years ago, called the Mindfulness Summit. It was like when mindfulness was just beginning to like break open, like in our culture, and it was just like the biggest summit on the planet. And so you were getting involved in these entrepreneurial endeavors, And not that, and this, by the way, just so everyone knows, she inevitably ended up putting on the summit and donated like $750,000 towards mental health um, organizations, right?
Yeah, around the world. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So which one of these, when you look at, if you can kind of look at the heartbreak, the illnesses that you've had, these you've been through entrepreneurial um, successes and setbacks, like which one of these would you feel like, or how did these like shake your sense of self? Because we all experience these setbacks in life, and how did it
Yeah.
kickstart your wisdom that led to deep resilience?
Yeah. So I kind of think about the biggest parts of my journey being what I just spoke about. When I was younger, I became really, obviously, I had a big turnaround. I became very passionate about mental health and sharing these skills with the world, and went on to become a mental health educator and do the Mindfulness Summit, things like that. And I also, just after the Mindfulness Summit, went through one of the most intense periods of adversity that I've ever been through in my entire life. And as you said, yeah, that really shook the foundations of, um, yes, I had been, it was like I was in the highest moment of my career. Everything was going well for me. Personally and professionally, I was just on a roll. And it was almost like straight after the Mindfulness Summit, I had two loved ones die in quick succession.
Hmm.
And then my relationship that I had been in for almost 20 years dissolved. And then I developed a chronic illness. And it was just one thing after another. My entire world just started to crumble under my feet. And I had all these amazing skills. So I'm using all of those amazing skills, which was very fortunate. And I still found myself at the brink of breakdown and burnout and kind of on my metaphorical knees. And the deep resilience method was born from me realizing that I wanted to access something more than I could access at that moment. Even with all my skills, it kind of made me dig deeper and ask myself, how did I get here? What is missing here for me that I'm not able to unlock what's deepest and truest and best in me to stay wise and loving and strong and effective. Um, and as I asked that question and got curious, uh, I started to develop a kind of patchwork framework for myself to follow, like almost like a 1, 2, 3, 4. When adversity hits me, I need something to lean on that's really robust for me. What can I do that's kind of like a 1, 2, 3, 4 step thing that I don't have to think about too much? And that was the beginning of the deep resilience method, and then it sort of unfolded from there. But the other thing, Elisha, about why the deep resilience method was born was I was also looking at what was happening collectively, how there's so much more uncertainty and demand and challenge and change happening in the world.
You and I were
And
just
me,
talking about that before we even got on this call, like that,
right.
all these things about the world right now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It's shaky right now. And if you look towards the horizon, there's more disruption and change coming our way from multiple different angles right now. And so I was holding that really close to my heart, this question of like, how collectively are we going to rise to all of this? Um, Given that, we're teaching kids to read and write in school, and we're teaching them geography and we're teaching them history and we're teaching all these kinds of things, but we're not teaching people how to handle fear. We're not teaching them how to overcome self-doubt. We're not teaching people how to handle stress really well, or how to, when big adversity comes, how to stay connected to purpose and empowered and confident and clear-headed. And we're not teaching those things. And in the world that we're living in now, um, I do feel like that's a little bit like that. Our model of mental health right now is kind of like um, not teaching people how to swim, But then, when they're drowning, giving them help then. So we're not really teaching people how to stay strong, but then when they hit burnout or breakdown or anxiety or depression, like I was when I was a kid, then we're kind of like, okay, get help now. But I feel like my own story was overlaid with this kind of passion that we should change the conversation about mental health now, because the world is really struggling. From the absence of mental illness to like mental strength, we're going to need to stay robust now because we've got a lot coming at us. So that was the question of that I wanted to answer, and deep resilience became my answer to that question of like, how do you boil this down to the fundamentals of how to stay really mentally strong and wise in the face of hard stuff.
One of the things I love that you talk about is, because I work with a lot of people who, historically as a psychologist and also my programs who have been exposed to, let's say, certain skills or meditation or mindfulness or whatever, and then they find themselves continuing to fall into tough moments, let's say, where they feel like it's like, how after all this time of doing work, going to therapy for so many years or whatever it might be, how do I keep falling into these tough moments? And one of the things I love about what you write about is you speak about being like emotional, like how you could be triggered emotionally. But then one of the things that you talk about is one of your first steps, and we'll get to the whole RISE framework, which is beautiful. And I love how I was listening to you right now, and I was like, oh, that's where the beginning of that word rise comes from. How are we going to rise, you said, to this next, to
Yeah.
what's on the horizon, which I think is such a huge calling, it goes beyond even the personal, and how do we collectively as well. But you talk about like a lot about how self-compassion is the first step. Now, here's a word that, like gratitude and other words, has become kind of a platitude. And I don't know, maybe among a certain circles, I might live in a little bit of a bubble, but it could become a platitude. But it's such an impactful and effective approach. And I want you to speak to it if you can, to someone who's right now busy, maybe beating themselves up, or even believes right now that self-compassion is not possible. Like, what would you say to them?
The first thing that comes to my mind is like, if it's possible for me from where I was, I am so confident that it's possible for everyone. But it is a skill, you know. I know I just kind of want to validate that, because I know what it's like to feel like there's no way. My inner critic has claws and teeth. I always say to people, like, my inner critic is definitely, I think we all have some degree of that feeling, that voice in the head that tells you you're not enough and puts you down and things like that. I think we all have it.
I think that's a
Um,
universal human experience for sure. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I don't know what it's like for other people. I can only speak for myself, but mine has claws and teeth. It's very quick to go to places. So, um, but to me, it's not about trying to get rid of that part of ourselves, trying to, destroy that part of ourselves. Or it's more like bringing on, the part of us that's wiser, and greater and more mature than that part of ourselves, and really learning how to respond to that part of ourselves. For me, this is what it feels like. It's like, I heard this phrase, reparenting.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes it feels like that inside of myself. Like the inner critic is this kind of younger part of me that's it's trying to help. It's conditioned from evolution to act like that, to help me to stay in the tribe, and to stay alive. But to meet that part of myself with understanding and wisdom, and that is a trainable skill. Like we were talking about this before, like these are skills, just like somebody teaches you the steps of a dance and you repeat the steps of a dance. You will be able to bring on this wiser, stronger, more loving part of your nature, and have that be the more dominant energy in your system. it's not that the inner critic is going to go away, but you can have a more harmonious and wise and effective and skillful relationship with that part of yourself. And so some of the heat does transform in my experience. I don't know about you, Elisha, but for me, my inner critic doesn't have as much power anymore. It's lost some of its heat and its ability to dominate. But it's still there. But I treat that part of myself with kindness and respect and dignity, and I comfort it when it gets cranky, and I reassure it when it's feeling frightened, and that in that process, another part of me becomes more dominant and more centered. So, yeah, I do want to reassure anyone listening to this that has an inner critic that causes them a lot of grief. These skills are totally trainable. Do they take a bit of effort and repetition? Absolutely. Does it take a bit of commitment to change these patterns? It does. But man, it's worth it. Living with a background sense of constant unworthiness and having a voice that is telling you that you're not good enough to reach your important goals and dreams, or putting you down and affecting your relationships, and dominating you in those ways that really do limit your potential and your happiness and your empowerment in life. Like, I think that is worth the time and effort and energy to put in. Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that it completely goes away. And depending on the context,
No.
like like I love the way what you're talking about here, because you've really lived this and been working at it yourself, and have felt it in an embodied way, and yet we know that, like in my own personal experience too, that it can come up in the unlikeliest places, even though we felt like we've done so
Mm-hmm.
much work around it. Like for me, as an
Absolutely.
example, I'm writing a new book. Mine won't be out till next January, 2026. But uh, immediately when I started to begin, writing this, like all kinds of self doubt came up. Like, who am I to write this? Is anyone going to want to read this thing? Like, will it even like sell any copies, like like that, who knows, like this. And I'm like, wow, oh my god, it had claws and teeth, just like I had never said that before, Melli, but yes, you named it. This had claws and teeth, and it was really causing procrastination. And like, this was like, I don't know, maybe a year went by before I even began to take it seriously. And so, and I would say, well, wow, look at me, I'm a psychologist and I teach mindfulness for 20 years, and I work with this self-compassion and all this stuff, but it can come up in these contexts, and that's okay. So just to normalize that. And
Yep.
I was actually happy. This is going to sound strange, but I was when I realized the self-doubt and I became aware of it and I could begin to work with it, I was like, wow, okay, this is good. Because as a teacher, and as you know, as a teacher and someone who speaks about this, it's really, stories are really important, and personal stories are really wonderful if you've shown how you can move through something. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is an opportunity for me to
Yeah.
self-doubt and see if I can move through this book and create a story out of it. Yeah. So thank you for that.
Yeah. I think we like for me it's humbling. I think, sometimes like self-compassion and a good sense of humor when you're actually sharing these skills with other people, and you do a thing in your head where you're like, I'm supposed to never have a tricky moment, or that kind of narrative. um yeah, I just find that it's just self-compassion with that, self-compassion with the next pattern that the mind comes up with, and also I think a good sense of humor. And I kind of laugh at myself a lot. I'm like, oh, so
If you can
much to
get to the
learn still.
humor part, if anyone can get to
Yeah.
the humor part, that's the optimal mediator of,
Yeah.
emotional suffering. So
Yeah.
I
Humor
want to get,
helps
let's
me a lot. Yeah.
humor helps. Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Let's get to your 4-step rise framework. Because this is the practical framework that I want everyone to listen to say like, okay, how can I incorporate this into my life to support, me in creating more deep resilience? So let's get to the method for a moment. You've described the human mind as both like a superpower. It really is a superpower in so many ways. It's amazing what it can do, how it can translate physical things, like it can impact us physically in our bodies. But you've also and you've also described it as our worst enemy, kind of like you and I were just talking about claws and teeth. Um, can you, when you talk, let's talk about the first R. We'll just kind of start there. Recognize and regulate thoughts and emotions,
Yeah.
and I'll let you unpack it for us.
Yeah. So, the first step in the RISE framework is to be able to recognize and regulate your thoughts and emotions in like healthy and helpful ways. And that, I think the first step to that is actually coming into a really good, clear understanding of your mind and how it works. And this is one of the things that, Elisha, I feel like we should be learning along with our ABCs when we're kids, right? How does the human mind work? It's conditioned. I won't unpack this completely, but when you understand why your mind does what it does, how it's conditioned from evolution, and it has fairly predictable um, patterning. Like the conditioning is actually fairly predictable when you get to know it. Um, and when you can meet it with understanding and clarity, it becomes very similar to learning any other skill. Like I use the example in the book of, when I was a little kid, I used to watch my uncle break in horses. So he was a person that could take a very wild horse, and he had a really amazing talent for taking a wild horse and training it step by step, how to let people ride it, how to carry a horse and cart, and sometimes how to do other really cool things. And so once he understood the basics of like the nature of the horse, he would meet that horse always with an attitude of respect and understanding, and just kind of go through the steps of being able to train it in a way where it would be able to kind of realize its potential more. So I think when it comes to regulating thoughts and emotions, I have a 3-step process basically for the basics of learning how to regulate your thoughts in helpful and healthy ways, and then how to regulate your emotions in helpful and healthy ways. And I think once you understand those fundamentals and you just practice them, then, like we were saying, they really do give you the ability to respond instead of reacting to those emotions. So that's the foundation. It's really just learning how to respond to your thoughts and emotions in ways that help you to thrive and help you to stay strong and be
Give us
flexible and adaptive. Yeah.
give us an example of maybe a quick practice someone could do right now who's maybe feeling anxious or has kind of like these repetitive self-critical thoughts happening. They feel like they're
Mm.
really kind of, stuck in that kind of emotional cycle.
Yeah. So let's say if somebody was feeling like, so we're talking about low self-worth when the inner critic comes up and it has claws and teeth. Um, so one of the first things you would do in that, so that there's a 2-step process. There's 2 really great evidence-based practices that work. There's a great body of evidence behind them, and they are diffusion, so the ability to step back from your thoughts, and then redirection. So diffusion and redirection are 2 really great things. So if you had your inner critic going on, one of the first things I would probably suggest is to take a deep mindful breath, just to center yourself back in the present moment, a little bit of redirection of your attention away from the thinking and into the present moment. And then name what's happening. So you could name the uh,
You
you
can even
could
say
give
claws and
the
teeth.
you could say claws and teeth. Yeah, you just
Yeah.
name what's happening in some way. You could just say, the inner critics arising, or
Mm-hmm.
claws and teeth are here, or something like, radio doom and gloom is playing. So you kind of label it, and you're acknowledging what's happening in that moment. And then you can redirect your what's happening in your mind in a different direction. One simple thing you could do there is self-compassion. Self-compassion is a great way to redirect your focus. So you could say some kind words to yourself. I often do. And when I'm having an inner critic attack, I might take that mindful breath, say, claws and teeth. And then usually what I'll do is I'll put my hand on my heart and go, oof, that had a bit of sting in it, that one. That hurt a little bit. And then I might say something like, may I be kind to myself in this moment. And then I'll probably say some other reassuring words, I don't agree with the inner critic. I might say, you know what, honey, you're doing really great. And if I was writing the book, because I had my inner critic come up a lot in the book, you're doing this because you believe in these skills going out to people. This is really important to you. Let's go. Let's just go do it. So that's one thing that you can do.
That's good. What I like about
Yeah.
what I say to people, because those loving kindness phrases, may I be kind to myself. The
Mm,
reason I like those too is because if you feel like you can't be kind to yourself in the moment, you're like, no, I just don't have this in me. Then being able to say, it's almost like a bridge, of
mm,
saying, may I be kind to myself? I don't have this in me right now, but may I learn to do that? Like, and by
yeah.
doing that, you're kind of sneaking in a way of being kind to yourself. but
I
you're
love
saying
that.
to your right? Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Because sometimes when you are in an inner critic attack, accessing that kindness just may not be
Yeah.
very available. Um, and if that's the case as well, yeah, just saying, may I try, may I make an intention to be kinder to myself. But you could also try something else as well. You could try asking yourself um, an empowering question, like what's a new and different way that I can think about this situation,
Hmm.
or how can I learn and grow from this, or what would be another way for me to think about this or approach this that's more useful or helpful. um, a lot of the time, Elisha, a lot of people I notice really benefit from simply asking the question if they're having an inner critic attack. It's like it helps them just take one step back, is to take a breath and then ask themselves, is this useful or helpful? Is this way of thinking useful or helpful for me right now?
Hmm.
And that can also be a bridging step. It's just a little step of like, hang on a second, let me just check in here. Is this useful or helpful? And then if the answer is no, then they can, if they've learned other ways of regulating, like maybe asking themselves an empowering question, okay, this is not very useful or helpful. Let me just sit with that for a moment. And then that can give you a little moment of pause to collect yourself, and then maybe easier to access inner resources like self-compassion. And so um, that's one of the foundational things that I teach people to do a lot with regulating their thoughts, is just to kind of continuously check in if you're starting to feel anxious or stressed or overwhelmed or self-doubt, to check in with what you are thinking and just to
Yeah.
ask that question. It's like is that useful or helpful?
I love that, because when you pause and you ask the question, I think what's happening is you're accessing a natural intelligence. So we can all
Yeah,
go on ChatGPT and or Claude or these different things, ask questions, Google.
yeah,
But when we ask ourselves questions, our brain searches for answers, and you're almost redirecting a focus a little bit.
that's
So
right.
that's really
Yeah,
powerful. Let's move to the I. So rise.
yeah.
Okay. So the I stands for
Inhabit the present moment.
inhabit the present moment. And so
Yeah.
people hear like be mindful all the time. Like you started the mindfulness summit. So like, be mindful. It's been on the top of magazines and everything like that. Like what's a specific exercise from deep resilience that makes mindfulness a little bit more tangible, maybe less intimidating for people?
Mm. A really simple one is just to do a practice of like dropping anchor. So if you are feeling really overwhelmed mentally, or you're anxious, or just wanting to take a moment of pause and collect yourself, dropping anchor would be just to take your attention down the length of your body and down into your feet, and just to feel your feet on the ground and connect with the sensations in your feet for a moment. just take a moment of pause, and like you can even do that now and just feel your attention there. And that's something that you can do on the go, right? Nobody's going to know you're doing it. I'm doing it with eyes closed right now, but you can do it you can do it if you were in a conflict situation with someone and you're starting to feel your temper rising. You can just take a breath without the other person even knowing, and just imagine that your attention is coming out of your head and going to the furthest point away and connecting like to the stability and the strength of the ground beneath you. That's a really good one, just to give you a moment to connect to a sense of stability and strength. Yeah. Yeah, it's a really simple one.
Here's what I'm taking away from that too, is that we know that when our mind is in a constant state of worry or overthinking, it's activating our nervous system, and which is associated with a chronic stress in that way creates inflammation in our nervous system. It creates in our bodies. It creates high levels of cortisol over time. And if you could do this thing that Melly's talking about, like drop an anchor, and you come down into your feet, by focusing on that, what happens is, from my understanding, it starts to dial down the thinking a little bit, because there's an inverse relationship between sensing that part of our body and our mind thinking. And if you do that, and you can begin to inhabit the present moment and feel this, and lower the thinking, you can dial your stress down, which inevitably translates into your physical health too.
Yeah.
And so that's a really powerful practice in the midst of difficult moments. It sounds like you talked about in your life, heartbreak and
Yeah.
and um, business disruption, and you can use
Mm.
those in those moments too.
Yeah. And the other thing it does is it can help you to move from reactivity to response,
Mm.
because once you're, there's that old saying, when your emotions go high, your logic often goes low. So that's pointing to the fact that once we start to get a little bit reactive, you can have the amygdala hijack. So your fight or flight system can hijack the smartest part of your brain, which is able to think rationally, find solutions, work through problems really effectively. So if you're in stress all the time, your ability to handle those challenges effectively is being quite diminished. So the more you can inhabit the present moment, lower your stress so that you can, you don't want to be caught in fight or flight all the time. And you're also not going to be able to handle your problems effectively and move through your challenges effectively. So we want the smartest part of the brain online. So the more we can um, ground attention in the present moment, the more we can actually respond effectively and stay calm under pressure as well.
And
Yeah,
I
we
want to
want those
say,
resources online.
yeah, when we just did that practice right now, because I did it, you said, let's just do it. So I'm like, okay, let's just do it. And I
Yeah.
dropped an anchor into the bottom of my feet. I noticed at some point, and I don't know if this was picked up on the mic or not, my body just took this breath and this exhale. So it was this kind of natural release that happened in that, by inhabiting the present moment. And
Mm.
I think those types of things are really powerful. Like if there was, imagine if there was, in the days, weeks, and months ahead, there was a little bit more of those in our lives. Those kind of like natural releases, the body resets. So that's
Yeah.
a powerful. That eye can be really powerful in your system.
Yeah. Really powerful.
Hey everyone, we're going to take a quick break to check in and talk about a program that's very important to me. I've been working with people for over 20 years, and in that time, what I've realized is that uncovering emotional healing, strengthening emotional health, and building resilience works best when we're learning practical skills that are evidence based, supported by a caring community, and have access to daily guidance and support. That's why I built my emotional health coaching program. If you're someone who's ready to take your emotional health to the next level, you're tired of yo-yoing around, you want to start really making real progress, whether it's building resilience, managing stress better, or simply feeling more balanced, you can get a free consult for the program. Just click the link in the description below to schedule your session and learn how we can support you. Now, let's get back to the episode.
Yeah.
Let's dive down into S. So here we have RIS, regulate emotions and thoughts, regulate and inhabit the present moment. S, stay connected to your values. Let's talk about a little bit about that, about the values being the foundation of our house and what keeps us steady in the storms of life. And, how do we figure out, how do we even begin that process?
Mm. I think if you look at the RISE framework to the especially the recognize and regulate part, a lot of that is about unwinding a lot of the things that we get caught up in. So we want to be able to unwind being stuck in self-criticism and self-doubt and anxiety and fear and overwhelm and victimhood. We want to be able to step back from those patterns and then find our center again through inhabiting the present moment. But what I found is that it's that on its own is not enough. It's not enough just to stop being stressed and overwhelmed and that kind of. You also need, like, how do you then orient yourself and find your strength and purpose and clarity in the face of adversity? How do you actually operate from a place of like purpose and intentionality? And so your values are, I think that's the place that you land. You unwind the stress and uncertainty and fear, and then you connect to the sources of strength inside you and take empowered action from there. So so your values to me are like that analogy that I give in the book is that they are um, like a house. The house is you. You want to build your house on a really strong foundation, on rock, not on sand. So a house that's built on a really strong foundation is going to stay really, really sturdy in turbulence and storms. But a house that's not built on a good foundation may not even stay strong during the good times. The foundations might start to crack, and the house is going to be it's not going to be able to stay strong even in good times. So your values are inner qualities, or sometimes they're called character traits, but they're basically the qualities with which you want to express through your behavior in the world. So things like kindness, things like courage, like loyalty, like humility, or playfulness, or adventure. So there's hundreds of different values, and we all have our own core values that we will like to orient our lives, and they're different for all of us. But when we identify our values, they become our inner compass that points true north. So no matter what's happening in our lives, if we can focus on what we can control. So if we, in the hard times, what we often do is we think about all kinds of things that are outside of our control, what the politicians are doing, what other people's opinions about us, or what's happening in the economy. There's a lot we can't control, but what we can control is our attitudes, our actions, and the way we speak. So our values are the thing that can give us the clarity of how we want to act during hard times. Yeah, so if we go ahead. Oh, I can't hear.
It could be like our North Star.
They're
Of
our
some
North
kind, pointing
Star
us
that
in the
guides us
direction.
through. Yeah. And we can orient through hard times and good times with a sense of purpose and empowerment and hopefulness.
Well, and if for you, like, how did you, like, I know there's a part of your story where you use that for yourself to move through a tough personal crisis. Like, how did that work for you specifically?
Yeah. So I guess one of the ways in which I found that I was not feeling as empowered, not feeling as strong, falling into patterns that weren't really serving me. Was I was actually going through a bit of a painful social conflict, and I was feeling really um, like victimized. I was very focused on, this other person is doing all these things to me, and that's not fair, and it's overwhelming. And I was really kind of um, feeling very overwhelmed by it. Um, and I think at a certain point, I really had to let go of all that I couldn't control. And I couldn't control a lot in that scenario, but the thing that I could control was connecting to the person that I want to be in that situation, and how I want to act, and how I would like to treat people. Um, and that really gave me so much of it. It was like landing on, like being in a storm and then being a boat that found a safe harbor, of just like, oh, I I can't control all of that. I need to let that be. But what this teaches me when I see this kind of behavior is, that's not the kind of person that I would like to be. I would like to be this kind of person, and that's all I can do. That's all I can control in this situation. So, and what is the next step I can take in
Speaking
the
of that,
expression of that?
speaking of that, like the E, we go now. You're kind of
Yeah,
moving into a little bit this engaged and empowered action, which is the
yeah,
final step of the Rise Deep Resiliency method.
mm,
You emphasize in this that acceptance isn't passivity. You also talk about what it looks like to move from maybe fearful inertia to taking more bold, meaningful steps. Maybe even when there's a fear inside that's screaming no, like stay here. What say a little bit about that? Let's kind of get into this E, because there's a rubber meets the road element in this.
yeah. Yeah. So, um, your values and your vision for your life, like for you and I, we have our values, and then we have a passion, a vision, something that we like to share with the world, like a book, or a course, or just a meaningful, for all of us, we have a different kinds of visions for our life, that are really meaningful and really matter to us. And so really, values and a vision is lovely ideas, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to actually empower you. It's not actually going to unlock your strength, your resilience, unless you actually take empowered action. And so, empowered action is where we take those values and we take that vision, and move towards it. So, for instance, like for a lot of us, when it comes to the collective as well, what's happening in the world, it's really easy to get overwhelmed by everything that's happening in the world. And there might be a gap between what's happening in the world and the way we would like things to be. We can't control all of that, but if we do have a vision for a world that's more sustainable, or a world that's more peaceful, we can do little things in our life, to give us a sense of agency, a sense of moving towards, and a sense of creation of that that world and those values that we believe in. And it's really important to know that if you know your values, but you're not living them consistently, you'll feel that, you know,
It's a misalignment. It's like you're
it's
outside of your integrity,
you're
like in
outside
some
of your
ways. You're fractured
integrity.
inside. Yeah.
Yeah, and moving back into alignment is going to give you an enormous sense of agency, and it's easy to feel apathy and overwhelm and hopelessness in the face of big challenges. But just by taking really small steps consistently, they don't have to be grandiose, they don't have to be huge, but just little small steps towards positive change and towards meaning can go a long way.
Was there ever a time where you're going through your own personal crises, let's say through this, even maybe before you wrote Deep Resilience, and you felt like you were, aside from 17, when you were saying like, I got two paths here, either I check out or I, give it
Yeah.
another shot. Um, but was there other times where you felt like you almost gave up on some of these methods that you were learning along that, like mindfulness or self-healing? Was there any moments like that?
Never gave up on. I I have had not moments when I gave up on when I felt like giving up on the practices, um, but moments when my own personal like neuroses or like where my self-doubt or my lack of self-compassion, when those things were, you know, like
Loud.
really in my face. I've had many, many moments like that, Elisha,
Mm.
that are so humbling, and it's so, so humbling because you can know these skills and you've learned these skills, and all of a sudden your stuff is all up in it's all up in your face. And it's not that I would have ever given up on the practices, but more felt so like there's such a big gap between where I am and where I would like to be, and feeling very frustrated in that, that I'm having trouble actualizing the skills and the wisdom and the effectiveness that I want. That's more what I've experienced.
Yeah, it's interesting because and the various people I've interviewed on this podcast so far, like parenting experts and different things, people I know well as well. Everyone's got a story of, oh boy, like I can't believe I blew up and I thought like everything I'm teaching is a total,
Oh,
I'm a fraud
oh
or something. I
yeah.
like, and then they come back to it, and then they see it as an integration opportunity or something like that.
Oh, I've had plenty
And
of
yeah.
those.
Yeah, no, you said it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
mean. It's normal along the change journey, along the journey of life, like for no matter so for anyone listening right now, no matter like how much you've developed over time, how much you've practiced or been working on yourself, there's going to be these flare up moments where things just get thrown out the window, and and to know that's just part of the journey and part of the process, and we do lose access, like you said,
Oh
sometimes
yeah.
to everything we've learned. It's kind of like when you were mentioning the amygdala, and you're like, it can get kind of hijacked. And when all the blood flow goes to that part of the brain, like you lose that logical reasoning, you lose access to your memory of these skills. But the idea is, how quickly can we come back? And I think that's what your deep resilience method is teaching us is, look, if you kind of like integrate this with some level of practice and repetition, this stuff's going to come back to you sooner. And that's the
Yeah.
that's the idea behind it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a lot of for me, because I think those moments are really sticky and tricky when we do get caught up. Often one of the first things that we do once we realize what's happening is we start to beat ourselves up. So it's like
Hmm.
we're having a moment of awakening and realization, and then very quickly the voice in the head comes in the back door and starts judging us for that and putting us down for that. So if one thing that can be so powerful that I try to practice, that I don't always get right, but I try to remind myself in those moments, this is a moment of awakening. Like this is a good moment. This is a success. It's not a failure. You're awake now. What can you learn from that? And to try and be self-compassionate. Like I'm always just trying to try to respond to what's happening in that sticky moment with compassion. This is hard, isn't it? I just got caught up again. But we're human, and this is how it is. Where I'm a transitional being. I'm awake sometimes, and sometimes I'm so deeply asleep I can't even believe it. I have compassion for that. We're human. This is how it is. So
Mm.
I try to practice quickly catching that and being just understanding and kind to myself, because it's how it is.
Yeah, because that's a if when in our good moments, that's a skillful thing to do. Is there
Yeah.
is there a like a ritual that you do like daily, whether it's in the morning or something like that, that kind of instantly grounds you? Maybe it's the anchor one. There's something else that you bring into your life?
Yeah. I every single day I do some kind of practice. That's my first thing. And I love my morning practice. And I do a mix of mindfulness and what you just spoke about, which is a practice that I started doing a lot when I was in my dark night, my second dark night of the soul. I started doing a practice a lot called anchoring, which is um, connecting to states of strength or inner qualities like courage, like calm, like um, fulfillment and contentment, and really using some of the principles of positive neuroplasticity training, a lot of the stuff that Rick teaches. Um,
Hmm.
and
Yeah, we got his interview a little earlier on. Yeah.
I loved that interview with him in Forest. It was really touching.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, that's what I do every day. I do mindfulness. So I inhabit the present moment, and I also um, connect to my values and to some of those states. And I have like music playing when I'm doing it. I often have like inspiring music playing when I'm doing the anchoring and really, really amplifying those feelings. And yeah, it's really made a big difference in the quality of my day, I have to say.
It, it's almost like you go through your rise method in the morning. That's kind of like what I'm almost like here. I'm almost hearing that.
Yeah,
Like it's a good morning ritual to go through that. Yeah.
yeah. I started leaning on it in the hardest moments of my life, and then I was like, this is a way of living for me. This is how I wanna do life. So yeah.
Is there a phrase that you bring into your mind, off here and there through the day or once in a while that supports like resilience? Not everyone
I
has, but I'm just curious.
No, you know what's interesting? I don't really have a phrase per se, but what I these days, the thing that I find is kind of like my hack, if you will,
Hmm.
to bring me back to if I'm feeling a bit lost. And I actually just do this and connect to a feeling of love. Um, and that's my kind of go-to. I find that that's becoming more and more my go-to for almost all of my hard moments now is just to take a breath and go here and just to reconnect to just like a reminder to be present and that I can connect to something deeper in that moment and connect to a feeling of love.
If you can do
Yeah,
that genuinely, if someone can do that
yeah,
genuinely, that if for those of you who are listening right now and not watching, Ellie's putting her hand on her heart and this kind of connection, uh, and it because the heart represents like caring and love, and then you're making that connection with your body, and it helps you inhabit the present moment in your eye of rise, and there's something really wonderful if you can kind of do that genuinely. Like that could be a really powerful practice. Let me ask you this because I'm aware of our time and your time, and I want to respect that and everyone who's listening. And if our audience right now, people who are listening or watching, can remember one thing about deep resilience, what do you hope that would be?
uh, the thing that I mean we haven't the thing that comes to mind is it's interesting because we just did this. Um, the essence of deep resilience, in a way, boils down to making the strength inside you bigger than the fear, making the love inside you bigger than the fear. It's really that simple. And if you can find a way, it's like we all, life is tricky. We're all going to have moments where we feel doubt, we feel overwhelmed, we feel alone and afraid. And in those moments, you do have a source of strength inside of you that is so much bigger than that fear, so much bigger. So just like find ways to connect to it, to remind yourself that it's there, and to live from there instead of being dominated by the fear. That's the essence of deep resilience is
Oh,
connecting to that part, letting that
I
be
just
in the
got
lead.
I got tingles in my body when you said that, so I know there's something really powerful about that message. Um, I want to give people an opportunity to find you too. Like everything you talk about, so powerful. People integrate this method in her book, Deep Resilience. Like if you really kind of take it to heart, integrate it. These are some really powerful things that can transform your life. So where can people find you? What you're doing right now? Give us a little aspect of that, and we'll share it in the show notes too.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Elisha. Yeah, you can find almost everything on my website at melliobrien.com. I won't spell it out because Elisha's going to put it in the notes. But you can find my book on there, and I do have a whole bunch of free stuff that people can try out. Some of the meditations, including the anchoring one I spoke about, just so that people know that's in what's called the Deep Resilience Care Package. So if you want to go and try that anchoring meditation, that's free. And then, yeah, you can find me. I have a podcast as well called the Deep Resilience Podcast. And yeah, I hope that's all helpful for people.
Yeah, I absolutely will be as they try it out. Thank you, Melli, for taking your time out of your day to be here with us, and for the work you've put into your Deep Resilience book and everything you've done over time to help individuals and humanity, and so many lives that you've touched. I know it's sometimes even just hard to be aware of that and take that in. And just over time, like all that you've done and the ripples that that's caused across communities. And so, really, thank you for everything you've done.
Thanks, Elisha. It means a lot.
Yeah. Okay. We'll see you again soon.
See
Bye
ya.
for now. Hey, thanks for joining me on this episode of the Emotional Longevity Podcast. I hope you found it as inspiring and thought provoking as I did. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to hit like down below, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone you know who could benefit from these insights. Your support helps us grow this incredible community and reach more people who need it. If today's conversation resonated with you and you're ready to go deeper, if you're ready to truly integrate these ideas into your life, I'd love to invite you to join me in a beautiful, supportive community that's doing this transformative work together. It's a space where you'll find guidance, connection, and the tools you need to create lasting emotional health and resilience. Check out the links in the description below to learn more. And before you go, make sure to tune into our next episode. It's one that you won't want to miss. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, emotional health isn't about just feeling good. It's about building the foundation for a longer, healthier, and more joyful life. I'll see you soon.